Who made that shot? The question rolled across the training ground, but nobody answered. More than 200 soldiers stood frozen behind the firing line, their eyes locked on a target nearly 1 mile away. A red signal light blinked once, then went dark. The electronic scoring board flashed a number that seemed impossible. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Even the instructors stared at the screen as if it had malfunctioned. Then one of the range officers quietly removed his sunglasses and looked toward the far end of the firing line. That was where the woman stood. 1 hour earlier, the atmosphere had been very different. The sun had barely risen above the rolling hills surrounding Fort Hawthorne. A cool breeze swept across the sprawling training complex as soldiers from multiple units gathered for the annual precision shooting evaluation. Pickup trucks, utility vehicles, and equipment trailers lined the gravel roads surrounding the range. Laughter drifted through the morning air. Conversations echoed between groups of competitors comparing rifles, discussing scores, and predicting who would finish on top. Most eyes were focused on the usual favorites. Sergeant Logan Hayes had won the event twice. Staff Sergeant Tyler Brooks was known for consistently placing near the top. Several instructors openly discussed which of the experienced shooters would likely claim this year's title. Almost nobody noticed the woman sitting alone beside a weathered wooden bench near the edge of the staging area. Emily Carter carefully wiped down the scope mounted on her rifle. Her movements were calm and unhurried. She wore the same uniform as everyone else. No special patches, no flashy equipment, no crowd gathered around her. In fact, many people walked past without giving her a second glance. She seemed completely comfortable with that. While others competed for attention, Emily focused on her equipment. She checked her scope settings, verified her ammunition, reviewed a small notebook filled with handwritten calculations. Then she quietly closed it and slipped it into her range bag. A group of competitors nearby noticed her. One of them tilted his head toward her bench. "You know who that is?" he asked. Another shrugged. "No idea. Probably support staff." A few chuckled. "She doesn't exactly look like somebody here to win." The comments were not especially loud, but Emily heard every word. She simply continued preparing her rifle. The men lost interest quickly and returned to their conversation. A few minutes later, competitors began checking in at the registration tent. Names were called. Scores from previous events were discussed. Friendly rivalries filled the air. Emily stood quietly at the back of the line. When her turn arrived, the young specialist handling registration glanced at her paperwork. He looked up, then back down. "You're competing?" he asked. Emily nodded once. "Yes." The specialist seemed surprised. "Right. Okay." He handed back her documents and called the next name. Several nearby shooters exchanged amused looks. Nobody expected much from the quiet woman who barely spoke. Nobody knew where she had trained. Nobody knew why she seemed completely unconcerned by the growing buzz around the competition. And nobody suspected that before the day was over, a single shot would leave the entire training ground searching for answers. The first stage of the competition began at 8 o'clock sharp. Competitors moved to firing positions spread across the range while instructors monitored conditions from elevated observation towers. The challenge looked simple on paper. Hit a series of steel targets placed at varying distances across open terrain. Wind speed changed constantly, making every shot a test of patience and judgment rather than raw marksmanship. Sergeant Logan Hayes stepped onto the line first. Confident and relaxed, he delivered a performance that immediately impressed the crowd. One target after another responded with clean impacts. Several spectators nodded approvingly as his score appeared on the electronic board. Staff Sergeant Tyler Brooks followed with equally strong results. Cheers and conversations grew louder as competitors compared performances. The atmosphere felt less like a military evaluation and more like a championship event. Through it all, Emily Carter remained quiet. She sat on a folding chair near the back of the staging area, occasionally looking toward the distant hills beyond the targets. While others talked about scores, she seemed more interested in the changing wind patterns sweeping across the valley. Every few minutes, she glanced at a small ribbon tied to a fence post. The ribbon shifted direction almost constantly. Most competitors ignored it. Emily did not. When her relay was finally called, several people barely looked up. A few of the more experienced shooters recognized her name from the registration list, but knew nothing else about her. One competitor leaned toward another and quietly asked, "Has anybody ever seen her compete before?" The answer was a simple shake of the head. Emily settled behind her rifle and adjusted her position. Her movements were smooth and economical. No unnecessary motion. No dramatic rituals. Just quiet preparation. The range officer signaled the start of the stage. One by one, competitors engaged their assigned targets. Emily waited. Nearly everyone else fired within seconds. She did not. The delay drew a few curious looks from nearby shooters. Then she finally pressed the trigger. A moment later, the distant target responded. Another shot followed. Then another. Each one looked routine. Nothing spectacular. Nothing that would attract attention. When the stage ended, her score appeared near the middle of the leaderboard. Respectable, but far from the top. The reaction was immediate. Several competitors who had been watching exchanged knowing smiles. "I knew it," one of them said. "She is average." Another laughed softly. All that time studying the wind just to land in the middle of the pack. Nearby, Logan Hayes glanced at the board and dismissed her score without a second thought. To him, Emily Carter was simply another competitor who would eventually disappear from contention. What nobody realized was that Emily seemed completely unbothered by her ranking. While others hurried to check standings, she calmly packed away a few items, drank water, and returned to watching the valley. The scoreboard mattered to everyone else. Emily appeared focused on something entirely different. High above the range, dark clouds slowly drifted across the sky. The wind changed direction again. Emily noticed immediately. A faint smile appeared for less than a second before disappearing. Then she picked up her rifle and quietly walked toward the next stage. The second stage pushed competitors farther into the valley where the targets became smaller and the environmental conditions became less predictable. What had started as a straightforward competition was slowly becoming a test of observation and patience. The afternoon wind rolled through the hills in uneven waves, shifting direction without warning. Some shooters adjusted well. Others struggled. As competitors gathered near the firing area, conversations naturally returned to the leaderboard. Logan Hayes remained near the top. Tyler Brooks was close behind. Their names drew attention everywhere they went. Emily Carter's name sat quietly in the middle of the rankings, exactly where most people expected it to stay. A group of competitors stood near a supply trailer discussing scores when one of them noticed Emily approaching the next firing position. "There she is," he said with a grin. "The wind expert." A few laughed. Another competitor folded his arms. "Maybe she is calculating how to finish in 20th place instead of 25th. More laughter followed. Emily heard the comments as she passed. Her expression never changed. She simply continued walking toward her assigned lane. The reaction seemed to encourage them. "You know what amazes me," one man said loudly. "She acts like she knows something nobody else knows." "Maybe she does," another replied sarcastically. "Maybe she is secretly teaching all of us." Several nearby soldiers chuckled. Even some spectators joined in. The remarks were not openly hostile. They carried the casual confidence of people who believe they had already figured someone out. Emily reached her position and began preparing her rifle. Behind her, the conversation continued. "I give her credit," one competitor said. "At least she keeps showing up." "That is true," another answered. Most people would have realized they were outmatched by now. The range officer called everyone to attention and explained the rules for the stage. Targets would appear at unknown distances. Competitors would have limited time to evaluate conditions and make adjustments. Speed and accuracy would both matter. The challenge immediately excited the crowd. This was the kind of event that often separated experienced competitors from everyone else. Logan Hayes delivered another strong performance. Several targets responded almost immediately after his shots. Spectators applauded. Tyler Brooks produced similar results and earned another round of approval from the crowd. Then Emily's turn arrived. She settled into position and studied the terrain through her scope. Seconds passed. She made no attempt to rush. A few impatient competitors exchanged smirks. One checked his watch dramatically. Another shook his head. Yet Emily remained focused on the landscape beyond the targets. The grass moving along a distant ridge. The shifting shadows beneath the clouds. The small indicators most people overlooked. When she finally completed the stage, her score once again landed near the middle of the rankings. The reaction was immediate. "Called it," somebody said. "Exactly where she belongs." Several competitors nodded in agreement. To them, the results confirmed everything they already believed. Emily quietly cleared her equipment and stepped away from the firing line. But as she walked toward the staging area, one person was watching more carefully than the others. Chief Instructor Daniel Mercer stood near the observation tower reviewing performance data on a tablet. Unlike the crowd, he was not looking at the scoreboard. He was studying something else entirely. And for the first time all day, Emily Carter had his full attention. The afternoon sun settled lower over Fort Hawthorne as competitors gathered near the central briefing area. Most expected another routine stage announcement. Instead, Chief Instructor Daniel Mercer stepped onto a small platform beside the scoreboard and waited for the conversations to fade. He was a respected figure on the range, a man whose opinion carried weight among both instructors and competitors. When he finally spoke, the crowd became silent almost immediately. "The next phase will be different," Mercer said. "The standard stages are complete." A ripple of excitement moved through the audience. Competitors exchanged curious looks. Logan Hayes folded his arms and smiled confidently. Tyler Brooks leaned forward, eager to hear more. Mercer glanced across the crowd before continuing. "This year we are introducing a challenge that has never been part of this competition." Now everyone was paying attention. Even spectators standing near the food trucks and observation fences drifted closer. The challenge is called the Long Horizon Test. Several experienced shooters recognized the name. Their expressions changed instantly. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some looked excited. Others looked concerned. The Long Horizon Test had a reputation. It was rarely attempted because it demanded patience, precision, and the ability to read environmental conditions that changed across vast distances. Success required far more than technical skill. It required judgment. Mercer pointed toward a distant ridgeline barely visible against the horizon. "The target will be positioned beyond the valley. Exact distance will not be provided." More murmurs followed. Competitors knew what that meant. They would need to calculate everything themselves. Wind, elevation, temperature, atmospheric conditions. Every variable mattered. "There will be only one attempt per competitor," Mercer added. "No practice shots. No corrections." The crowd immediately began discussing strategies. Logan Hayes appeared energized by the announcement. He had spent years building a reputation as one of the best marksmen in the region. Challenges like this were opportunities to prove it. Nearby, Tyler Brooks was already reviewing notes and calculations with another competitor. Emily Carter stood quietly near the back of the gathering. Her reaction seemed almost non-existent. While everyone else debated distances and conditions, she looked toward the hills beyond the range. The same calm expression remained on her face. A competitor standing nearby noticed. "She does not seem worried." Another laughed. "Maybe that is because she knows she has no chance." Several people chuckled. The assumption felt natural after seeing her remain in the middle of the rankings all day. One man shook his head. "This challenge is for serious shooters." Emily simply adjusted the strap on her rifle case and continued watching the valley. The comments drifted past her like background noise. From the platform, Mercer lowered his tablet and studied the crowd again. His gaze paused briefly on Emily. Earlier that day, he had reviewed every shot taken during the competition. Most competitors showed predictable patterns. Emily did not. Her results raised questions. Questions he had not yet answered. As competitors dispersed to prepare for the final challenge, dark clouds continued gathering beyond the distant hills. The wind shifted once more. Most people never noticed. Emily did. She looked toward the horizon for several seconds, then quietly picked up her rifle and began walking toward the preparation area. Behind her, the crowd continued talking about favorites, rankings, and expected winners. Nobody realized that the competition they had spent all day discussing was about to change completely. The preparation area buzzed with nervous energy as competitors made final adjustments before the Long Horizon Test. Tables were covered with notebooks, weather meters, range cards, and carefully organized equipment. Conversations grew more intense with every passing minute. Estimates about the target distance varied wildly. Some believed it would be 800 yards. Others argued it had to be well beyond 1,000. Nobody knew for certain. That uncertainty was exactly what made the challenge famous. Logan Hayes sat beneath a canopy reviewing calculations with complete confidence. He had built his reputation by thriving under pressure, and many competitors expected him to dominate the final event. Tyler Brooks appeared equally focused, making constant adjustments to his equipment while discussing wind conditions with another experienced shooter. Around them, competitors exchanged theories and predictions, each convinced they had discovered an advantage others had missed. Emily Carter sat alone on a folding chair near the edge of the preparation area. Her rifle rested across her lap. Unlike most competitors, she had no stack of notes spread across the table, no lengthy calculations, no visible signs of stress. She simply watched the valley beyond the range. Every few minutes her eyes shifted toward the distant ridgelines where the changing weather revealed subtle clues. A competitor walking past noticed her calm expression and laughed. "Still studying the scenery?" he asked. Several nearby shooters smiled. Maybe she thinks the mountains will tell her the answer. A few more chuckles followed. Emily offered no response. The competitor shook his head and continued walking. Across the preparation area, Chief Instructor Daniel Mercer observed quietly. Earlier that afternoon, he had reviewed performance data from every stage. One detail continued bothering him. Emily's scores looked average on the surface, but her shot placement patterns told a different story. During every stage, she had deliberately avoided pushing for maximum performance. The consistency was too precise to be accidental. Mercer had spent decades evaluating shooters. He knew the difference between someone reaching their limit and someone holding something back. Emily Carter appeared to be doing the second. The announcement finally came over the loudspeaker. Competitors were instructed to move toward the final firing line. Excitement spread immediately. Groups gathered their equipment and headed toward the range. Spectators followed behind them, eager to witness the conclusion of the competition. As Emily stood and slung her rifle case over her shoulder, dark clouds continued drifting across the horizon. The wind shifted once again. This time the change was stronger. Several competitors immediately began adjusting their calculations. Others looked concerned. Emily simply paused for a moment and watched a small cluster of leaves moving along a distant fence line. Then she nodded almost imperceptibly and continued walking. Ahead of her, the final firing positions stretched across the ridge overlooking the valley. Beyond them lay the unseen target and the most difficult shot of the entire competition. The crowd expected the usual favorites to rise to the occasion. The leaderboard suggested the outcome was already predictable, but as competitors settled into position and the wind continued changing across the valley, a quiet feeling began spreading among the instructors. Something unexpected was coming. The long horizon test began as the late afternoon light stretched across the valley. Competitors settled behind their rifles while range officers moved into position along the observation points. The target itself remained invisible to the crowd. Only a small camera feed connected to the scoring system provided confirmation when a competitor successfully completed the challenge. The uncertainty added to the tension. Nobody could simply aim and fire. Every shooter had to trust their calculations. Logan Hayes was among the first to step forward. A hush spread through the spectators as the two-time champion prepared for his attempt. He studied the terrain carefully, adjusted his scope, and waited for the wind to settle. Several long seconds passed before he finally took his shot. Moments later, the scoring system responded. The crowd applauded. It was a strong result, better than most people could achieve, and it immediately reinforced his position as one of the favorites. Tyler Brooks followed soon afterward. His performance was similarly impressive. The spectators responded with another wave of approval. Competitors exchanged respectful nods. These were the names everyone expected to see near the top. One after another, experienced shooters took their turns. Some performed well. Others struggled with the changing conditions sweeping across the valley. The wind seemed determined to challenge every assumption. Distances appeared different depending on the angle of the light. Even veteran competitors found themselves second-guessing calculations they would normally trust without hesitation. As the list of participants grew shorter, Emily Carter remained seated near the end of the firing line. Several competitors noticed and smiled. "Still waiting?" one asked. Another laughed. Maybe she is hoping the target moves closer. A few nearby spectators joined the laughter. The comments were met with amusement rather than hostility. By now most people had already decided exactly who Emily Carter was. In their minds, she was the quiet competitor who had spent the entire day floating around the middle of the rankings. Nothing more. Nothing less. Emily appeared completely unaffected. She sat quietly with her rifle resting beside her, occasionally glancing toward the distant hills. Chief Instructor Daniel Mercer continued watching her from the observation platform. The longer he observed, the more curious he became. Everyone else was focused on the scoreboard. Emily seemed focused on the environment itself. The direction of the clouds, the movement of grass along the ridges, the subtle shifts that many competitors ignored once their calculations were complete. Eventually, only a handful of names remained. The crowd's energy began fading as fatigue settled in after a long day of competition. Then the announcer called Emily Carter to the firing line. A ripple of conversation moved through the spectators. Several people exchanged amused looks. One competitor folded his arms and grinned. Well, this should be interesting. Another shook his head. At least she made it this far. Emily stood, lifted her rifle, and walked calmly toward her position. There was no sign of nervousness, no visible pressure. The valley stretched silently before her as the wind shifted once again. Behind her, the crowd waited with modest expectations. Ahead of her lay the single most difficult shot of the day. And somewhere beyond the distant horizon, the challenge that would change everything was waiting. Emily Carter lowered herself behind the rifle and settled into position with the same calm precision she had shown all day. The noise from the crowd faded into the background. Competitors who had spent hours talking now watched quietly, waiting to see how long it would take before another average score appeared on the board. A few still smiled. Others looked bored. To them, the outcome seemed obvious. Emily rested her cheek against the stock and looked through the scope. The distant landscape came into focus. Rolling hills, thin ribbons of grass moving with the wind, shadows stretching across uneven terrain. Most competitors had focused on the target. Emily studied everything around it. Seconds passed, then more. Murmurs spread through the spectators. What is she waiting for? Someone asked. Maybe she cannot find the target, another replied. A few people laughed softly. Logan Hayes stood with his arms crossed, watching from near the scoreboard. Even he appeared unconvinced that anything remarkable was about to happen. Yet Chief Instructor Daniel Mercer remained completely focused. He noticed something unusual. Emily was not making constant adjustments like the others had. She was simply observing, watching, waiting, almost as if she already knew the solution and was waiting for the environment to align with it. Another gust rolled through the valley. Flags positioned near the firing line fluttered sharply. Several spectators instinctively looked toward them. Emily did not. Her attention remained fixed on the distant ridges. Then the wind eased. Not everywhere. Only in a narrow corridor stretching across part of the valley. Most people never noticed. Emily did. Slowly, she adjusted her scope. One click, then another. Nothing more. The movement was so small that it almost went unnoticed. Daniel Mercer narrowed his eyes. He had seen elite shooters work before. The best were never the fastest. They were the most certain. Emily's confidence looked exactly like certainty. The crowd continued waiting. The silence gradually replaced the earlier laughter. Even the people who doubted her had become curious. There was something different about the way she carried herself. No tension, no urgency, no sign of someone trying desperately to impress anyone. Finally, Emily inhaled slowly. The valley seemed to hold its breath with her. She exhaled. Her finger moved gently against the trigger. A sharp crack echoed across the range. Then everything became still. No conversations. No laughter. No movement. Every eye shifted toward the distant scoring display. The electronic system processed the result. 1 second passed. Then another. Suddenly the board flashed. A bright signal appeared across the screen. The crowd stared in disbelief. Several competitors stepped forward as if they had misread the display. Others looked toward the instructors for confirmation. Nobody spoke. Daniel Mercer looked from the scoreboard back to Emily Carter. For the first time all day, he allowed himself a small smile. Emily calmly lifted her head from the rifle and began securing her equipment. Around her, the silence continued growing. The score displayed on the board was not merely good. It was something nobody on that range had expected to see. And at that moment, every assumption people had made about the quiet woman in the middle of the rankings began to unravel. By the time the final phase of the training cycle arrived, the atmosphere around Emily had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible only a few weeks earlier. Nobody openly questioned whether she belonged on the team anymore. The doubts had not disappeared completely, but they had become quieter, replaced by something far more important. Respect was beginning to take root. The instructors noticed it first. During briefings, team members listened when Emily spoke. During planning sessions, her observations were considered instead of ignored. She did not celebrate the change. She simply continued doing what she had done from the beginning. She arrived early, stayed focused, and treated every task as another opportunity to improve. One afternoon, the unit received notice of a complex evaluation exercise that would combine Navigati. By the time the last morning came, the base no longer felt like a place that had tested Emma Reeves from the outside. It felt like a place that had finally revealed what had been inside her all along. The sky over the Virginia training grounds was pale blue, the air cold enough to show every breath, and the team stood in formation beside the long stretch of sand where the first week had nearly broken their confidence. Mark Reynolds stood 2 rows behind her, quiet in a way that carried more meaning than any speech. He remembered the first laughs, the doubtful looks, the sideways comments that had followed her from the barracks to the obstacle course. Now no one laughed. No one whispered. When the instructors called her name, every head turned with the kind of respect that could not be ordered, borrowed, or faked. Emma stepped FO.